Great, thank you. So let's begin.
All right. Well, I'm ready when you are, Madhu.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining in. I hope you're all safe and healthy. So just a few things before we begin the session. We would like to keep this session as interactive as possible, and we want you to post your questions in the chat or the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time, and we will address them as we go or at the end of the session. We are also recording this webinar, and we'll be able to send you a copy by email at the end of the session or by tomorrow. So I am Madhumita, and we have Darren Schott, the growth lead at Tenantcube and property manager in the Niagara region. We are here to discuss how COVID-19 has affected the rental market and what measures landlord can take to ensure a steady rental income in these difficult times. It's been about 10 months since COVID-19 was identified as a serious threat to our world, and strict measures were taken to control it. The economic repercussions of it were felt immediately, where hundreds and thousands of people lost their jobs, were laid off, or had to take severe pay cuts. Many were forced to choose between paying rent and having to spend on other necessities. And tenants were willing to take a chance with not paying rent, especially with the rent freeze in effect. As a result, landlords are hurting. In North America alone, about 80 million small landlords are wondering how they can make their next mortgage payments, the utilities, and the maintenance of their properties. Now, I'll stop here and let Darren share his ideas on how landlords can make it work. Over to you, Darren.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction, Madhu, and I would like to thank and welcome everybody for joining us today. Yes, my name is Darren. I am the growth lead here at Tenantcube. But before I was with Tenantcube, I was also managing some properties, like I imagine many of you are. And COVID has thrown a major wrench into the way that things traditionally have been done. And a lot of the rental and investment property industry is very rapidly changing. Now, a lot of people weren't prepared for what has happened and is currently happening during COVID. So what this webinar is going to be based around is collecting rent during COVID-19, just some steps that I think are very important to help ensure that you're able to collect the rent now and put the right steps in place so that in the future, should anything arise, you'll be well prepared. Now, COVID, we don't know the length of the situation. Now, it may be on the back nine. It's certainly looking like it could be that way, but you could already have a number of issues that are taking place with respect to the rent. And there's also the second foot that can drop, which could be the economic downfall or a situation that could arise due to some of the effects of COVID. So we don't really know how the situation is going to turn, if it will go north, if it will go south. But what we want to make sure is that whether we are a property manager with many units or just a small 1 or 2 unit landlord who's just got a couple of properties to add some supplemental income, we want to make sure that our businesses and our property investments are protected. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to go through my thoughts, and I would like to remind everybody, these are just my personal thoughts on the situation, given some of my experiences and industry knowledge. But I would ask that relative to where you are, you make sure you have a firm understanding of your local laws, your local regulations, and do your own homework. Make sure that anything that we say, you verify it on your own end and make sure everything is all right for you to apply to your situation, because one thing about the industry is it is relative in many cases to your specific location. So these are more of a high level overview on some strategies on what you can do as a small landlord to make sure you collect the rent. So I'm just going to get started. Everybody can see my screen okay? Excellent. So what I'm going to do is start here, and there we go. So renters, they're facing unprecedented times. Now, we all are, But in many situations, they're feeling it harder than anybody else. A lot of times, in certain situations, they're already going to be in a high-risk situation. There may have already been economic uncertainties that developed early on in COVID. There's a lot of stress going on. It's just a very hard time for everybody, but renters are particularly affected by the results caused from COVID with respect to the economic situation. So 54% of renters throughout North America have been impacted in one way or another. So whether this be they've directly lost their job or perhaps they've reduced their number of hours, there's a lot more of uncertainty with respect to their employment. Now, many of them may have already been in high-risk situations. So what I mean by that is their income on a yearly basis may have already been pretty low. They may have had a situation where they were just already living paycheck to paycheck. There's a number of different factors that the tenant may have already been facing before COVID hit, and now COVID has only gone along and just really just expedited that. So they're really facing some challenges. And they're not just facing the economic or the rent challenge, they're facing professional challenges, they're facing personal challenges, financial stresses. All of these challenges are all coming in at once. So before they may have been working from a nice cozy office. Now they're working at home. They've got 2 kids, causing all kinds of nightmares during the working day. The situation is different all over the place, but there's just that added level of stress across many areas of their lives. And, it's going to take a toll on people, both on how they interact with others, how they're able to take care of their responsibilities. And a study that we used for this webinar actually found that 32% found that they would stop paying rent in a financially tough situation. So this is, almost 1 in 3. So when you have 1 in 3 that wouldn't pay rent in a tough situation and nearly 1 in 2 that could actually be in that tough situation, very rapidly you can have situations arise where you may have large numbers of your portfolio not paying rent actively. And if you're a small landlord and you only have 1 or 2 properties, if one of those or both aren't paying, it can cause just very, very big amounts of damage to your investment. So paying rent on time is super important for a landlord or a property manager. I'm sure you guys know that. And we're going to talk today about how we can go ahead and fix that. But before we do, let's understand that not only renters are going to have a difficult situation like this, landlords and property managers are as well. And the reasons why they're going to have this tough situation is there's a rapidly changing landscape with a lot of misinformation out there. So you'll notice that on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis, all the different regulations with respect to COVID, how businesses can operate, how society operates, that's changing daily. And that's going to impact on how you can interact with your tenants, how you can interact with your properties, and all the items that you would normally do on a day-to-day basis are all going to be impacted. And they're going to change quite often and quite frequently. And we don't know what the future is going to look like. There may be certain things that change and just never go back to the way they were. So it's important to stay on top of this information. Also, one of the biggest reasons for the misinformation, in my opinion, is that evictions have been delayed and hearings have been delayed. So when hearings are delayed and evictions are delayed, a lot of times the word gets out there, the gossip gets out that, hey, they're not evicting anybody, rent's no longer due. Well, that's not the case. Rent still is due, just like your bills are due, just like the property management companies, your costs are still there, the utilities still due, everything's still due, and that includes the rent. So, half of the battle is trying to defend what your investment is and make sure that people know that, the rent is still due at the end of the day. And that a lot of this misconception that out there is because of the evictions and the hearings. So, your maintenance costs are also going to pile up. not only are you going to be able to, in some cases, get into your home or investment property less frequently, your costs may arise to actually get appropriate services or to get access because of the pileup of work. And then beyond that, the social distancing practices that have to take place. There's a number of reasons why the costs can scale up very quickly. So again, there's just a ton of challenges that the landlords have to face, and as well as the property managers. But the big one is that the mortgages are still due, the bills aren't going to stop. So yeah, there may be some sort of deferral programs, but at the end of the day, the door is going to knock and that money will be due. So to protect your investment, you need to make sure to communicate clearly and frequently to your renters that the rent is still due. So I take a 5-step process, and this isn't anything new. This isn't anything I've created. This is stuff that I've learned over time, and that I think if you apply it in a way or in a similar respect that works for your specific situation, it can help you collect the rent. So the 5 steps for a landlord to take, I've got listed here. So we'll just go by them one by one and then into a little bit more detail on an overall strategy. So the first one is to have a plan. Now, the reason you want to have a plan is that you're not blindsided. So when tenant A says situation B has arrived, you know what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to understand how to handle that. So just having a plan in place is very important. Empathizing and sympathizing. This one is, probably 1A or 1B up there on the importance level for me, because just like you're going to expect your tenant or your renter to sympathize with you, you need to sympathize and empathize with them. As I alluded to earlier, there's personal stresses, there's professional stresses, there's financial stresses. So all of these things build up, and if you're not being sympathetic to that situation and you're not willing to work with them, they're not going to be willing to work with you, and they're not going to sympathize with your situation. So what we need to do is we need to show sympathy so that sympathy can be returned to us. So just being very empathetic and, really just using your heart and your mind to try and move things in the right direction for all parties involved. Now, this one is the other very important point, which is, again, 1A or 1B on the importance level with empathy and sympathy, is explain the rent situation. So with your tenants, with your renters, explain that the rent is still due. Depending on how much information you want to get out, let them know, hey, I've still got a mortgage, I've still got bills to pay, I've still got utilities, and I sympathize with your situation. I want to help, and I want us to move in the right direction for all parties involved. However, you may have heard A, you may have heard B, but based on the information I'm working with and my expectations, the rent is still due. So that has to be clear from the onset. And if it hasn't been yet, make sure one of the first things you do is you clear that up so that everybody knows the rent is due, and ideally it's due on time. Okay. So next thing is give the tenant options. So, depending where you are, here in Canada, luckily there has been CERB, so there has been some level of protection. But south of the border, a lot of our American friends are seeing even a more drastic situation because the financial backing wasn't there. So you need to be flexible. If somebody says, hey, listen, I would love to pay, I'm just not sure how to do it, this is how we traditionally do it, it may be a problem, you want to have a lot of options, because if you provide them options A, B, C, and D, and you say, hey, listen, this is how I can have you pay, these are some options that you have, the ball's now in the renter's court. Whereas if you say, hey, listen, this is your only option, this is the only way we're going to do things, and they say, hey, I can't do that, well, you haven't really provided pathways to success or the outcome that we've all wanted. So you have to really provide some good options for them. And the last, preferably the option you don't get to, is rent deferral. So we want to make sure we collect as much rent on time as possible each month. But hey, things happen. If somebody's lost their job, they don't have the family and friend networks to help support them. They don't have the credit availability to help support them. you may run into a situation where you're forced into this fifth option or this fifth step, but that's part of it. So we'll go a little bit deeper into each of these steps. And the first one, of course, is having a plan. So the first thing about having a plan is to have it in writing. Now, this may sound simple, and it is at the end of the day, is to write it down, because if you have something that's written, you're not going to be thrown off if there's a curveball thrown at you. So by having something in writing, by having understood the laws and regulations as they affect the situation today, and then continuously updating that document on your policies and your procedures will help you provide consistency to your tenant, consistency to yourself, and help provide a path to success and how to move things in the right direction. So it's very important that you do this. The next one is implementing digital payments as part of your plan. So digital payments, especially during COVID, are so important. They're going to help reduce face-to-face interactions. They're going to help keep things on time, and they're going to help keep things very consistent. So with a digital payment, there's a couple of different digital payment options that are out there. But the reason we want to implement it quickly is because we don't want to be seeing as many door-to-door interactions. We don't want to be missing out on the rent. So whether it be something where, hey, it's just a quick e-transfer if you're on the smaller scale, or one of the other options if you're on the larger scale, it is important to put that in place. And I would recommend putting that in as part of your written plan, with also layers to that as well, so that if for whatever reason option A is no longer viable, you have a backup plan B so that you can collect the rent on time and as much as possible. The next thing you'll want to do is provide clear and frequent communication. So this one is very important. As I alluded to earlier, there are those misconceptions out there that maybe the rent isn't due, maybe because there's delays on evictions, there's delay on rent board hearings, there's all kinds of different delays and obstacles in the way to collecting rent and evicting right now. Because those facts are true, people are getting that misconception that maybe the rent actually isn't due. So what you'll want to do is provide clear and frequent communication of your expectations, but also to continue to build that rapport. Reason being is, if my tenant knows what the expectations are of them, that the rent has to be paid on time, or there will be consequences. Now, whether that be they'll have to be paid at a later date, there will be late fees, whatever those are, they need to know what the outcome of not paying rent will be. And then they also need to be communicated with. Reason being is, if I am struggling to pay my bills, I'm going to prioritize what I can pay and what I can't. And what I think I can get away with not paying, I'm not going to pay. And then what I think I can get away with paying, I will. So if you have that personal relationship where you've communicated your struggles as well, and you're trying to build on that mutual empathy and sympathy, what's going to happen is you're going to increase your chances of receiving those payments. If you're a small landlord and they know, hey, my mortgage is still coming in, my bills are still coming in, I may not be able to stay afloat and provide you with this living and this good situation that I'm providing because of the economic realities I'm facing now, they're going to consider that in their factors when they're looking at what can I pay, when can I pay it, and how much can I pay. So providing that clear and frequent communication is important. And also make sure it's written. Send an email. Email is great because if you put it through an email, there's no misconceptions. Oh, hey, I thought you said this. Did you really? There's none of that. It's clear, it's written. So just do it frequently, be clear, try and stay engaged, try and build the rapport, build that relationship up. And, a little bit of conversation will go long ways on all sides. And then take the time to understand the situation. So, it's changing every day. So your plan has to be continually updated. Just know what's going on so that when you communicate with your tenants, you can help inform them as well. They may not be staying up to date on the same information that you are. So you want to make sure you're up to date with the most up-to-date information and the most applicable information as well. So this area is very important. So this is steps 3 and 4, which is explaining rent and also, explaining the rent situation and then also providing options. So you guys, the renters, the landlords, property managers, everybody's still got bills. So if you're a property manager or you're an owner, you have to explain this point. You have to say, listen, I understand you're having some difficult times right now, and we all are. Here's some of the reasons why we still need you to pay rent, because we have these burdens or these challenges or these obstacles that we need to deal with. And I want to make it clear to you that we're going to try and be flexible, and we're going to try and move this to the destination we all want it to go, which is a strong resolution for both sides, but the rent is still due. So whether we give you options or whether we end up even down that path, I would not mention rent deferral at that point, but wherever you end up, you just need to explain to them that, listen, we know that the times are tough, but we're going to work with you, but the rent is still due. And make that clear, and always make that the number one priority in your communications and in your plan. So if, for example, things go off and they're not able to pay, they need to know that you'll be taking steps A, B, and C as part of your rent recovery process. So whether that be sending them out notifications, or whether that be sending them out certain letters that are, or documents that are important based on where you live as part of the eviction process, whatever the situation may be. And then diffuse any of those misconceptions. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of misinformation and a lot of misconceptions out there. Make sure you're continuously diffusing those. So, if people have that misconception that, hey, do I need to pay all my rent? Is the government just not going to take care of the landlords later on? Make sure you're on top of that. Make sure that everybody involved, your team members, yourself, your renters, everybody is working with the most accurate and up-to-date information. And then with the options, be willing to negotiate. If somebody says to you, hey, listen, I'll put it on my credit card, but I can't afford the extra, 3% in fees. Maybe that's one of those times you say, okay, fine, I'll take the fees because I would rather take 97% than 0%. So, you got to give them some options to work with. And, those are going to be relative, again, to your specific situations, the logistics behind it. Perhaps it's, as somebody who just says, hey, listen, I'm not going to be able to pay you everything this week. Can I split it up into 2 payments? Give them lots of options, work with them, hear them out, and understand maybe they have their own options that you haven't thought of that will work for them. So just make sure you're being very open, willing to listen, willing to hear their ideas, but also willing to present your own ideas. Because if you only present them with one option, you say it's that way or the highway, you've kind of put the onus on them to do it that one way. Whereas if you provide them with many options, you're putting the ball in their court to make the next move. And you say, hey, listen, I've provided you A, B, C, D option. You're really going to set it up where they've got all kinds of opportunity now, and you haven't really put them into a corner. So that's going to be the higher probability of actually getting something out, ideally, again, as much as possible and on time or as close to time as possible. Now, the last one is rent deferral. So this is ideally the last place you want to go. If you've exhausted all your options, you've tried to build a good relationship or continue to build your good relationship, you've tried to make consequences clear, you've provided options. Sometimes, especially given COVID, and especially if the government or social assistance aren't there, you have to perhaps take this option. And this is going to be taking less, but deferring the rent. So just because somebody can't pay the full rent at that time doesn't mean they can't pay at all. So if your rent is $1,800, for example, and they say, hey, listen, I can pay you $1,000 in rent, that's great because that's better than zero. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that you're able to negotiate the most rent as close to on time as possible and as frequently as possible. You'll also want to make sure that when you're in these negotiations, before you even get started and before you even recommend this, that you know the law in your area, everything that's applicable to you, so that everything's above board. You don't want anything like this coming back to bite you later. And you also don't want it to be viewed as a discount. So if you don't do things properly, if you don't make sure it's clearly communicated, if you don't make sure it's written down, it may be assumed on their end or in the eyes of other parties that this is actually not deferral, it's a rent. So make sure to do your research on deferrals, because they are going to change from location to location. But if you can get some now and then work out a payment plan on the back end, that is going to provide you, with at least a last case option. And again, this all goes back to relationship building, because, let's say, for example, it goes down to collections at some point. The chances of you actually getting any of that money back through collections at that same volume, very, very low. A lot of times with the collections, you're going to pay a fee, or they're going to give you a flat rate for, pennies on the dollar. So you don't want to go down that route. You want to try and work it out between you two as parties. And you'll want to just document everything. If there's an agreement made, make sure it's documented, make sure it's legal, and make sure everything's above board, so that you protect yourself, you protect your investment. And of course, at the end of the day, you just try and help your tenants, and you show that empathy, you show that sympathy. We're all people, we're all struggling, we're all going through something that none of us expected to get into, and we all have to get out of it together. So at the end of the day, that'd be my last piece of advice is, sympathy and communication will go a long way, but also being clear on your expectations and your requirement to move everything in the right direction. So that's what I have for now. I'll throw it back to Madhu for a moment here.
Thank you, Darren. Some great tips and insights here. We have had some questions rolling in from our participants, and I'll read them out one by one. So here's the first question. You spoke about digital payments, so this participant will want to know, what are the different options or methods for digital payments?
Yeah, so with respect to digital payments, there's going to be two types that I'll recommend. And it all depends on your size. So if you're a small landlord, if you have one property, two properties, maybe five properties, e-transfer. E-transfer is very easy. You can literally pick up the phone and say, hey, my rent's not in yet, or hey, your rent's coming due tomorrow. Can you e-transfer it over? It'll maybe cost $1 for the tenant. In a lot of cases, it'll cost them nothing. It'll usually come in within about 30 minutes, and it'll automatically be deposited into your account, which less wait time is great, because then you have access to pay those bills. Now, if you're in a situation as well where let's say you have 4 to 5 people paying, it is going to be paramount that the people who are paying are able to pay you as quickly as possible and on time, all the time, because your other bills are still going to be coming in, and you're only going to be working at 80% of your expected income. So that's for the smaller side. Now, if you're in a larger organization, I imagine you've already done this, but that would be to go to some sort of pre-authorized draw. That can usually be done with the aids of technology, and there is usually some sort of transactional fees there. But again, this is going to be something you've most likely applied when you're in a larger situation, or if you're a property manager managing multiple properties. So that would be my two different ways: is some sort of automatic draw or e-transfer, depending on the size.
Great. So this next question, I think you would like it. So this person wants to know, getting a software solution sounds complex and expensive. How can a small landlord like me use it?
Yeah, so I mean, that's true. It has traditionally been expensive, and it traditionally has cost an arm and a leg for some of these softwares. However, over the last few years, it has changed. There's a number of different softwares out there now that will achieve different goals and work within different parameters and price points. At Tenantcube, we use a freemium model, so there's free and paid services depending on what you need. If you have specific use cases, requirements, or you're not really sure what to do with technology, I would recommend getting a hold of us at Tenantcube. You can find our phone number and our contact information on our website. Not only will we work with you to find the right tool, even if we don't have it, we'll help you find somebody who does, or we can help provide insights on some strategies to achieving your goals with what technology you're currently using. So lots of options out there. As long as you do a little bit of searching, you should be able to find something that'll fit within your price point.
Great. So this last question is interesting. So he asks, or he or she asks, if my tenants do not pay my rent, Would it be okay to not pay utilities or take up maintenance requests for that unit?
Yeah, that one is a big no. So whatever it is, like, I mean, your bills may get deferred depending on your situation, depending on where you are, depending on the relationship you have with those vendors or whoever it may be. You may end up getting some sort of deferral, but I find it very unlikely that anybody's going to say, you know what, don't worry about paying. And this is, again, why when we go back to, we have to communicate that the rent is still due. Because if that rent isn't coming in, you know, a lot of property managers and a lot of property owners aren't working on big margins. So it's paramount to just make sure that everybody knows the rent is still due, because I find it very unlikely, slim to zero, that you're going to be able to get out of any of your bills. Your mortgage is still going to be due. You're still going to have to pay your employees, your bills, everything on your end still going to stay the same, and in many cases will increase in cost. You have to make sure that you're still collecting rent.
Okay, thank you, Darren. So that's it for today, and thank you all for joining in. If you have any more questions about today's topic or how Tenantcube can help you manage your properties, please write to support@tenantcube.com and we'll help you out. Also, if you want us to cover a specific topic that you have in mind, do let us know that too. And we hope to see you in our future sessions as well. So thank you for now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar.